Hello everyone, my name is KrazyFlyinChicken, and today is the very first day of the early access release of Foxhole. I have been playing this game for over 10 months, been part of the pre-alpha, and so I have seen everything there is in this game. I'm going to give you guys a quick rundown of the grand strategy in this game, because I've seen from our huge influx of new players that some people are very confused about what they should be doing. I've put out a tutorial on how to do things, like mine scrap, build a logistics chain, join the combat force, but a lot of people are very confused about what they should be doing, because after all, Foxhole is a sandbox game. It is entirely up to you how to take your strategy, how to take your team, and then turn the map to your advantage. So I've gone into each of the three currently existing campaign maps and taken a screenshot of the current status of the game. These are screenshots taken straight out of the game, so you can be fairly certain that these are all very real world scenarios. And I want to go over them very quickly so that if you're playing Foxhole for the first time, that if you're playing on one of these maps, I'll be able to give you some advice on how it is you can take your grand strategy or take your one or two friends and make a big difference in your game. So we're going to start with Upper Heartlands here. And now, the most important thing to note in any strategy is the supply lines. Okay, if you want to win your game, I promise you, you will make the most difference by disrupting your enemy's supply lines and protecting your own. So in this map, we see the traditional setup. We've played this map dozens of times, and almost always it comes out this way, with the Colonials holding Loftmire, Blemish, Oleander Homestead, and Greenfield Orchard, and the Wardens holding Baronstown, Great Barony Ranch, the Foundation, and Deep Law. That's very typical, but what's not typical is this. This FOB here is controlled by the Colonials, and it's really, really far forward. So this is almost guaranteed. If you're just joining into this game, this is where your combat is going to be. If I was a new player, this is where I would be heading. And it certainly helps that there's a giant marker here telling you to rally and defend it. That's usually a dead giveaway. Okay, so as a Colonial, this is your supply line. This is, like I said, this is probably where the fighting is taking place. Your supply line is going to be running from Loftmire, probably a little bit cross-country into the FOB, because if your supply line is running this way, it's crossing in front of the FOB, it's very likely to come under fire. So I think it's unlikely your supply line is going to want to go down that road. So this is probably your supply line going to Loftmire to pick up soldier supplies. Now this symbol of a shirt is the soldier supplies. This is what you need to spawn at this FOB. So you can be certain there's going to be trucks going back and forth bringing new spawns into that FOB. Furthermore, weapons, which cannot be produced at Loftmire, because you can see from these symbols here, these are the weapon production facilities, weapons factories. The supply line will also be coming in from Blemish. So you can be fairly certain that trucks are going to be using this road. So that is the Colonial supply line. Warden supply line. See, if I was going to try to knock out this FOB, I would almost certainly take all of my guys and spawn at Deep Law, because it is the shortest distance, and Deep Law is under the most threat of attack from that FOB. So I would be setting my spawn at Deep Law and sending my men east towards the FOB. And this is probably what's happening right now in this game. Without actually looking at the game, I can be fairly certain that the battle line is something like this. It's going to be the Colonials going east, or west, sorry, and the Wardens going east. And there's some battle line probably on this road somewhere. And the Warden supply line. So Deep Law, as I mentioned from Blemish, the weapons factories here are produced right inside the town, and the Wardens can produce their own build materials using the refinery here. So they don't need a resupply of either weapons or build materials to Deep Law in order to keep this defense going. That's the advantage of the Defender. You get more resources available to you in order to repel the attack. But what Deep Law is missing is soldier supplies. Like I said, this symbol here, the picture of a shirt, is what you need in order to spawn at Deep Law. So you'll need to produce soldier supplies and put them into the town hall here at Deep Law. What that means is there is still a Warden supply line probably running down this road into Deep Law, because they will need to get build materials to the soldier supply station in Baronstown, and then get the build material or the soldier supplies produced and then brought back to Deep Law. Otherwise, because this is your other soldier supply station for the Wardens, the supply line will probably be going this way. you'll notice that the supply line is considerably longer than the colonial one. Now, if I had one or two guys and I wanted to make a big difference in this game, I would take them, and as a colonial, I would take them and probably blockade this crossroad. Because both supply lines, no matter what, if you want to get soldier supplies into Deep Law as a warden, they will have to go through this crossroad. So blockading that as a colonial could do some considerable damage to the warden offensive on your FOB. That's what I would do. So, as a warden, what would you do? Similar story. Since you know the colonials will need weapons at their FOB here, the best thing you can do is stop that from happening by taking out the only place where you know the trucks have to go, to this crossroad here at Providence Road. If you take control of that crossroad, any number of soldiers that are positioned at this FOB are eventually going to run out of equipment and fail in their attack. So that's what we can look at for that. So let's jump to the next game. So that's Upper Heartlands. If you're playing on that, I would take a careful look at that and plan your strategies accordingly. Remember, supply lines are super important, especially on Upper Heartlands. So this is Endless Shore. Now, Endless Shore, once again, we see a very, very traditional setup. Every time we played this game for the last 10 months, this is typically how the beginning towns go. So the Colonials have the south side of Saltbrook Channel, the Well, Enduring Post, and Woodbind. The Wardens control Tuatha Watch Post, Light's End, Vulpine Watch, and Brackish Point. Now, Endless Shore is unique in that there are a lot of bottleneck positions here, and supply lines, unlike in Upper Heartlands, are not as critical because it is so difficult as a warden, for example, if you wanted to disrupt a colonial supply line, perhaps running between Enduring Post and Woodbind, it is very difficult as a warden to get across this long, shallow point and across dangerous terrain in order to get at the enemy supply line. So we can typically assume that any game in Endless Shore is almost always going to end in a linear push across one of the bridges. So this is more experience, less about knowledge of less about game knowledge, but the battle lines are very likely centered around these bridges. And I say that because even though supply lines don't play an important role in this game, or rather partisan tactics don't play an important role in this game, or on this map, the bridges are still ultimately super critical because you cannot push without control of the bridge. So the Colonials on the north side of the map here are probably fighting in these open fields along North Star, because otherwise I would expect to see an FOB at North Star from either side. So the reason why you'll typically see a linear push across these bridges, like for down here at Kelpie's Main, is because even if you were sneaky as hell, let's say you were a sneaky colonial, you were spawning at this FOB and you managed to cross this river and disrupt the warden supply line here in the back, you would not be able to push against them very hard because you don't have a supply line. You can't really run a supply line through these shallow waters. They get stopped by these by the mud and by the rocks. So you can't really supply your front line. You can't get more ammo, you can't get more weapons, you can't even set a spawn close to the front. So you still need the bridge down here at Kelpie's Main if you want to make an advance. So even though you don't necessarily have an option to disrupt the enemy's supply line because of the limited number of ways to cross the river, you still have to take the bridges in order to push the enemy's towns. So in this game, if you had 2 or 3 guys and you were hoping to make a big difference, Kelpie's Main is not the way to go, because Kelpie's Main is almost always a slugfest. This is a great place to go, by the way, if you're like brand new and you just want to shoot stuff. Kelpie's Main is almost guaranteed conflict. Every game we've ever seen in Endless Shore ends with some sort of slugfest going back and forth across Kelpie's Main. If you were a colonial and you wanted to make a difference, I would set your spawn at Saltbrook Channel. Saltbrook Channel has 2 ways to cross that almost immediately belong to the colonials because the town hall is so close, and you also have a small bridge here that you can cross to attack Brackish. The battle lines on this side of the map, you can actually disrupt supply lines. So with 2 or 3 guys, you'll see huge fights going on up here at North Star, because North Star is typically where both sides will set their first base in order to push the enemy. So you can definitely get some good fights there and make a huge difference. But the Warden supply line to Brackish Point has to come from Vulpine Watch or from Tuatha Watch Post. And you'll notice that both of these supply lines cross vulnerable bridges here and here. So as with 2 or 3 guys and a satchel charge, as a colonial, you could, for example, take your guys and blow up this bridge, and that really sets back the warden advantage. If you blow this bridge, then that means that the wardens are pretty much guaranteed to be doing a linear push from Vulpine Watch to Brackish Point and then to North Star. So just destroying one of these 2 bridges really splits the team in half, the warden team in half. Okay, so for Deadlands, since I did the colonials for the Endless Shore map, let's do the wardens for this one. So the wardens here, you'll notice, actually have an extra town. They've managed to capture Bryan Glen down here in the south. They've got Bryan Glen on the south side of the river, Callahan's Boot, Iron's End, the Spine, Callahan's Gate, and Callahan's Belt. Meanwhile, the colonials have the advantage of Abandoned Ward here in the middle, Liberation Point, Salt Farms, and Suns Hollow. Now, typically, Bryan Glen belongs to the colonials, but the wardens had pushed, to me anyway, probably across this wooden bridge north of Bryan Glen. I know that because there is an FOB here and an FOB here. If the wardens had taken Bryan Glen with a supply line, then they would have had to have cleared these 2 FOBs before pushing down this road to get the supply line to Bryan Glen. Now, that doesn't mean that a supply line doesn't exist. Okay, so let me just back up a second here. The supply line from the wardens, because Bryan Glen doesn't have a soldier supply station, just like in the other 2 maps, we can be fairly certain the supply line is running from Callahan's Belt. But because the wardens control Callahan's Boot, this crossing is closed. And but because the colonials control Abandoned Ward, it is likely they're able to pour into the warden side of the map using these 2 bridges. So if you were a 1 or 2 or 2 or 3 wardens hoping to make a difference in this game, I would be fairly concerned that the colonials are going to be attacking Bryan Glen, probably from Salt Farms, but also possible that they're coming from the pits. And I would be deathly concerned that the colonials will be using armor, because this is a wooden bridge right here at this crossing, which means that the wardens will not be able to get armor into Bryan Glen. That's going to put the wardens at a severe disadvantage south of the river. The only way for wardens to get armor to the south side of the river will be at this bridge here, because it's the only one that the wardens have a set up town hall that close to the crossing. So this is where your armor is going to have to go. But as 2 or 3 guys, you may not necessarily get that choice. You'll have to just make do. But that also gives you some good foresight, that knowing that because you're going to be at a disadvantage in armor in Bryan Glen, it may make good sense as a warden player to bring RPGs and other anti-armor equipment to Bryan Glen, drive it down to this point here, and then just walk it into town. Because you know you're gonna need it. Doesn't matter what the colonials are gonna do. You know they're gonna bring armor to Bryan Glen, so you better get prepared for that. All right, so that's it. Now you have at least a basic idea, no matter what map you're on, of what it is you should be doing. Even if it's not necessarily it's not what you have to do. I'm just giving you some ideas, and to take that knowledge and apply it elsewhere to other games or to other maps, because this is what Foxhole is. It is a grand strategy game where you need to take a step back from the combat, think carefully about what your opponent is doing, and then screw him as hard as you can. This is KrazyFlyinChicken. Thanks for watching.